We are very happy to have the guest who will stay here also tomorrow, and this is 23rd, or is it 24th? I think it's 23rd Šmitkov's evening. And today our guest is Manuel João Ramos from the Anthropology Department of International Studies Center of ISCTE, of University Institute of Lisbon. Yeah, he's doing a lot of different things. His research was first on medieval contacts of Ethiopian Christianity with Portuguese Christianity, let's say, or European Christianity. And further on, also to this is related the nowadays studies of conflict. No? But recently he's more outward involved in the so-called graphic anthropology, which we are also very interested in. And today we will focus maybe more on the graphic anthropology. That means using the drawing in research, actually, if I simplify kind of or describe. But we will also touch some other topics like intangible cultural heritage maybe, or we'll see, and Portuguese anthropology, so not to stay just with this topic. If someone would like to know more, also invited for tomorrow lecture on cognitive anthropology, which is kind of related to this graphic anthropology. Today we already had one workshop when we were already speaking about graphic anthropology in more practically oriented terms. Yeah, I hope I didn't forget a lot of, I forgot a lot, but some crucial things of the introduction. Also, yeah, the interest in a fight for pedestrian zones and in a kind of relation to gentrification of the Lizbona. So yeah, if you will have questions, you don't need to stick just to the graphic part. You can expand your questions. Yeah, now maybe, yeah, we will also Enya Grabian and Jana Prof, no? Yeah, I was not sure if I pronounced correctly. The students from MA and BA studies will talk and we will make a kind of Q&A, but we'll see. So I would just put kind of introductory questions, two of them. The first one, as you said, that it would be good to talk also a little bit about Portuguese anthropology in a way. I thought maybe to start through this institutional relation to the Centro of International Studies. In Portugal, anthropology was in one part related very much to the Portuguese cultural heritage in a way, no? And the national construction of national identity, as in Slovenia. And in the other side, it was anyway the country with history of empire. So this is also related. This question is very wide, but maybe we can. Maybe you can try to just to sketch this institutional position. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So thank you for inviting me to this talk. Q&A. Yeah, I'm Portuguese. Supposedly I'm an anthropologist. I identify myself as an anthropologist, even though I do all sorts of things. And actually, I think in a way it comes, I think it is, it's alright. Because, yeah, Portuguese tend to be very eclectic. As I was sort of saying in this morning, we don't think too much when we don't have many philosophers in Portugal. Yeah, so in a way we follow what others, when others lead, and we're happy to follow here and there. And it's true, yeah, we have this agreement with the Ljubljana University, our department, but it's the Department of Anthropology. It doesn't have much to do with the International Studies Center, that is, which again, it's a good example of the way we organize things in Portugal. We have in our institute 3 schools, actually now 4 schools, I think. So we have the School of Sociology, and then we have the School of Social Sciences. And then you could ask, why is there a School of Sociology different from the School of Social Sciences? Where anthropology comes, anthropology and social psychology are in social sciences, but sociology is not, it has a proper school, because it doesn't have much to do with intellectual coherence, it has to do with power. Sociologists have power, so they got a school. Anthropologists don't have power, they got mixed together with all the rest. But actually the International Studies Center, which was the African Studies Center, and it's been an important center of research in Portugal, with quite a lot of connections in Europe and in Africa, is of the sociology school, not anthropology. So I'm in the department of anthropology, which is in one school, but I research in another school, because I didn't want to be tied to anthropology. And the African Studies Center is a multidisciplinary center in a monodisciplinary school. So this is Portugal. We don't care much about the problems of paradox. In a way, paradox is good. It's just we don't treat it, we don't treat paradox kindly usually, but in Portugal we do. So this is just to clear the waters. We have this agreement, and it's thanks to the agreement that I'm here, and it was thanks to the agreement that Alenka Bartulovic was there in Portugal last year, and but not in anthropology, in sociology. And anthropology is an important part of our institute, but quite secondary. Well, it is important in the institute, and our institute is quite strong in anthropology. But it's interesting to see, and I wanted to talk a little bit to sort of explain this. What is Portuguese anthropology? In the 19th century, there were quite a few interesting people working, in philosophy, anthropology, history, prehistory, folklore, and then that school died out. And there was no impact on the next school and the next group of people in the early 10s and 20s of the last century, headed by more ethnographers keen on collecting information all over the country. So it was first school very theoretical and tied to into European studies, and then that died out. An ethnographic sort of school appeared with the First Republic, and then the First Republic died out and the school died out, and then there was Estado Novo, the Salazar regime, where another school appeared. And I wanted to talk a little bit of this school, because somehow it's when academic anthropology appeared, and I chose the drawings of this man, Fernando Galhano. He was a very interesting draftsman working in a team that did quite a lot of work, ethnographic work, but not as different from the previous ethnographic work, not only in Portugal but also in Portuguese-speaking Africa. And it was a team that was headed by one of the fathers of modern anthropology in Portugal. His name was Jorge Dias, and accordingly, he was not very good in intellectual coherence. He was very paradoxical. He did his PhD, finished his PhD in 1944 in Munich, which is a great time to do PhDs and a great place to do PhDs. Good that it was not in Berlin, but it was in Munich, and he married a German. And he was very, very into Kulturkreis studies. And he studied communalism in northern Portugal. And then he arrived in Portugal, he came back. And he was doing this ethnographic, studying little villages, but with this idea of trying to understand these little villages within the Kulturkreis framework. But in the late 40s, early 50s, even though German studies and German connections are quite interesting and strong in Portugal, mainly in law studies, theory of law, the fact is it was not very politically it was not right to claim to have a German connection, so he started quoting and referencing culturalism, American culturalism, and so became very strong in American culturalism. But that lasted only 4 or 5 years because he went on to become a structural functionalist. And it's very easy. Just take one tape out and you put another tape in. You change references and you become whatever. So we don't very much care for creating a school, but picking up bits and pieces according to the times. And then during that period, the period where he was a culturalist and then he became a structural functionalist, he started doing quite a lot of work in Africa with his team. So, and it was interesting. It was a whole team, and they would go to Mozambique, to Angola, to Guinea-Bissau, to Timor, East Timor, and also all over the country, doing surveys for the ethnographic surveys, and it's a very rich and rich materials that were never treated with any coherent theoretical framework, because when it came to from a theoretical framework, he was all over the place. He would quote anything and everything, but suddenly, because he was friends with a Brazilian sort of leftist sociologist called Gilberto Freire, who had written a book that was very influential called Casa Grande and Big House in Senzala, about the sugarcane production in Brazil, and this weird setup where you have slaves and ex-slaves and house slaves and work slaves and family and connections and children from the slaves and from the ex-slaves, and so he viewed creolization as in a very benign way. And hence he was very influential. He created this notion of Lusotropicalism. That is, that the Portuguese-speaking world was more based on culture and language and less on the purity of blood. So what made the Portuguese-speaking world was this easiness of adaptation to climate and to different people, especially if it was men adapting to native women, but they wouldn't talk very much about this. The fact is that there was a glorification of creolization and this Portuguese adaptation. So, and this was very interesting for the Salazar regime, because it was a gift to justify, after the Second World War, to justify the continued presence of the Portuguese authorities in Africa. So saying, yeah, our colonialism is not based on racial attitudes, we are not racist, we have a different way of doing things, and we have a Creole community, and we adapt and they adapt, and so it was a gift for the Salazar regime. This talk, which I mentioned, comes from the left, from the sort of caviar left in Brazil. that was further theorized precisely by Jorge Dias and his team. But none of this is very neutral, but it was made sort of neutral and accepted. There was not very much talk against this, either before or during or after. There are some criticisms of Lusotropicalism, but after the revolution, Lusotropicalism was re-established as a viable way of explaining our present in Europe and in Africa. So there's not actually a very strong criticism of this vein, because it's very self-serving. So everyone sort of agrees to this notion that we are not racist, we adapt, and everything is okay, and we're very nice, and we have pastel de nata and this and that, and so anthropology sort of was installed in academia through these institutional ties and through a very strong connection to Portuguese Africa research, and this school reached the revolution and sort of died out, because after the revolution a new group of people came who sort of put all the others aside except one or two, which sort of became like an emblem to bridging the old school to the new school. But the new school is just this European Anglo-American mishmash. There were people coming from France because they had migrated, or France and Belgium, so they were more francophone, and they would bring Lévi-Strauss into the country. But then there were the good and the Jack Goody people coming from the UK, Cambridge, and the others from Oxford, and and we sort of adapt to, who cares? I mean, it's like a great supermarket. You take this one and you take that one, and so eclecticism is quite, it's very strong. It's quite the norm. And so there's not much to say about Portuguese anthropology. So, meaning, actually, sometimes I tell my students that the last controversy in anthropology took place between 1904 and 1907. That was the time when two ethnographers wrote against one another. And since then, there's no more controversy. And so it's a very interesting way of going about, not criticizing, because we're not very many. So if you start criticizing, things become personal, and you don't want to have conflict. So it's just, we adapt, but I just wanted to show that. So this is Fernando Vilhena. He was actually a very good draftsman, but doing things very, in this very classical way of. Did you see? Very precise drawing, especially he was doing material culture, and he was very good at this sort of drawing. But unfortunately, we don't have much before or after Fernando Vilhena. I mean, he was one of his own. There was some in the 1920s, 1020s, some draftsmen who do some stuff, but the only graphic anthropologist is Fernando Vilhena. But and so when that school, that group of people sort of left, no more graphics in anthropology. Of course, then came the cameras and the visual anthropology, this and that. And so there was no more connection to that tradition that he had started. Not a big tradition, because he started and he finished it. And so that's the landscape. It's a very bare landscape. In intellectual terms, it's like a desert. In respect to tradition, it's quite a desert. And I started doing my fieldwork in Ethiopia, and because I had done work research in medieval studies, in legends about the Orient, the East and Africa, and there's almost no one working on Ethiopia in Portugal, because who pays for research on Ethiopia? Who cares about Ethiopia? Even though there's a very strong, very important literature on Ethiopia in the 16th and 17th centuries, the fact is that Portugal and Ethiopia are, as I usually say, we are the tail of Europe, and Ethiopia is in the Horn of Africa, so the tail and the horn don't connect very much. My connections are not very much. I don't dialogue very much in African studies, because Ethiopian studies are quite particular. Portuguese African studies are very much directed towards Portuguese-speaking Africa. There's not very much research beyond Portuguese-speaking Africa or Portuguese-speaking world. When a Portuguese anthropologist or historian goes to India, he'll end up in Goa, studying Portuguese in Goa. If he goes to Brazil, he'll look for Portugueseness in Brazil. He couldn't care about Italians and Americans and Japanese traditions in Brazil, or Indian traditions or African tradition. We're always after ourselves, because we can't find ourselves, but we're very concerned about national identity, and the ethnography in Portugal, because there's such thing as Portuguese ethnography, it has been all about substantiating and justifying this national identity and expurgating Portugal from Iberia, because Iberia is dominated by Castile, as the Catalans keep reminding us, and so Portugal has a very strong sense of, we want to say we are a nation and we have a culture that is separate from the rest of Iberia, and very few people sort of cross the rivers and the frontiers, but between Minho, which is in the north of the country, and Galicia, there's more things that connect than that separate, even in linguistic terms, or between Extremadura in Spain and the interior of the country. There's so much that connects. We are part of the same pig, pork cults, because there was this cult around the pork, the pig, and from the late classical era, there was this the figure of the pork in both Spain and in Portugal, and so we have all these rituals and the cookery and the rituals and this and that, but people don't see that the same things appear in both sides of the border. If you go to Alentejo or to Andalusia, you have a continuum, but Portuguese anthropologists or ethnographers don't cross the border, and Spanish don't either. So we created these two subdisciplines that very, very seldom connect with each other. But the same, I would say, is true in many other parts of the world, I'm sure. In Ethiopia, vis-a-vis Sudan or Somalia or Eritrea, it's the same. So there's the foundations of these schools are not neutral. They contribute both to the colonial project, and they contributed for many years to the colonial project, and they contributed to this very bare and very naive sort of notion of national identity. So if the regime changes, the ethnographers change and the discourse changes, but it's still the same. So you have this ethnography of the late 19th century, late monarchic ethnography, and then First Republic ethnography, then Second Republic, and then Third Republic, and we wait for the next step. And in Africa, it's the same. For instance, Jorge Dias and his team, their major work is on the Makonde in northern Mozambique, and it's a huge work. in pure quantitative terms, it's huge. It's 4 volumes, very large volumes of ethnography. They covered everything: religion, ritual, economy, politics, kinship. You know, they took the guides,
the notebooks,
the
notes and queries,
notes and queries, and they filled all the items. But then you ask, why were they in Makonde doing work with the Makonde? Well, because in Makonde, the Makonde were the center of the rebellion, of the Frelimo rebellion against the Portuguese army. So it was important to know who the Makonde were, and of course, Portuguese anthropology is never neutral. And I remember, for instance, in the late 90s, I would turn my head everywhere, and all my colleagues were Brazilian specialists. But the year before, they were not Brazilian specialists. They became Brazilian specialists because there was this commission for the commemoration of the discoveries, and there was money for research in Brazil. So everyone became a Brazilianist for that period. Now people are whatever ists. So I think that's the major trend in Portuguese, a survival trend, and try to figure out how power accepts our discourse. So it's a very tame sort of anthropology. It's not very critical, as I say. There's no controversy. There's no. So it's a very interesting setup. But I don't communicate very much. Hence, I'm more in the International Studies Center, not in anthropology. Because I like controversy, and I'm a bit of a contrarian, and I like to dialogue, and I dialogue with colleagues from history and archaeology and sociology and political science in an area which is very cosmopolitan. Ethiopian studies are a very cosmopolitan area of studies because Ethiopia was not colonized. So not being colonized was the first step to having it mentally colonized by everyone, in a way. That is, you have American, US research on Ethiopia, you have Canadian research on Ethiopia, you have Argentinian research in Ethiopia, Mexican research on Ethiopia, you have Icelandic, Finnish, Swedish, Norwegian, Danish, Polish, Russian, probably Ukrainian, I'm sure Yugoslavian, whatever that is, research, I'm joking, Israeli, Japanese, Korean, everyone does research in Ethiopia. So it's a very interesting area of studies because there's no hegemony of a country sort of disciplinary hegemony that exists in Portuguese-speaking Africa, even though the most interesting research is not done by Portuguese, but rather by Italians or French. But there's an area called Portuguese-speaking, and the Portuguese only go to Portuguese-speaking Africa mainly. The French are very strong in French-speaking Africa. The British are very strong in British English-speaking Africa. But everyone meets together in Ethiopia, and that I think is funny and interesting. And so I started doing my research in Ethiopian because I like to draw. I started doing drawing in Ethiopia, and because I've already explained, because I like to draw. Suddenly, the publisher of the book said, "Why don't you add some drawings to the book?" Yeah, why not? And so that's how my adventure with graphic anthropology as a mental topic came about, to think, well, actually for me to think a bit more why I do drawing and why I do drawing in field work, but it's like an afterthought, meaning I didn't conceive, I didn't prepare mentally, I'm going to do research in field work with drawing because this and this and this. No, it just happened to be like this.
So just
in a very Portuguese way.
Actually, thank you for reading my next question, which would be like just to introduce more into the direction of the graphic anthropology. So first, you were not combining, as you explained a bit, not combining drawing and research. They were kind of two separate paths in life, no? And then in Ethiopia, how comes that you decided for this forum, for the kind of travel sketch book forum? Because before you were drawing other things, no? Also not only sketchbooks. How comes that in Ethiopia you decided to do this sketchbook, and how, as you already mentioned, this came then into the book on actually on the legends?
Okay, yeah. Also, the drawings don't have much to do directly with the content. So that book, all books are reminders of previous books, and of course there's so in a way I wanted to publish a book that somehow would conform to the specificity of Ethiopian studies. And there's a British anthropologist who was a disciple of Evans Pritchard. Her name is Wendy James. She studied the Huduk in the border of Ethiopia and Sudan, but she was a Sudanese. And she actually has a very interesting chapter in a book, which very few people read nowadays, but it's really worth taking a look at it, which is called, forgot the title, Localizing Strategies. And it's a book edited by Richard Farden in Edinburgh University Press, 1990, and it's a book about localizing strategies, how you use literary referencing and imagetic referencing to say to the reader that you're there, and that and what kind of research topics and what kind of interpretation you do about the place. You do that. You do that research and use those topics and use that grammar and you use those topos because they are part of the localizing tradition. That is, if you read, for instance, the what's it called, the book by Turnbull on the Pygmies, Forest People. The first sentence in Forest People mentions the heart of darkness. They mentions the fact that the Pygmies live in the heart of darkness, and he says that in the heart of darkness there is light, because he wants to reframe and reinterpret the notion of darkest Africa, because there's a light of freedom of these people live in a community with the environment, etc., etc. But he has to quote The Heart of Darkness by Conrad, because it's part of a localizing strategy. If you study in the Trobriand Islands, you have to use topics that refer to previous anthropological and literary products and cosmographic products that the West has been producing since the West is West. So in a way, we taint the research or our view with the history of all the views that Europe has produced about all these different places in the world. And of course, when James says, if you read Sudanese anthropology versus Ethiopian anthropology, they're very different. She prefers Sudanese anthropology because it's more British and more... And she criticizes Ethiopian anthropology because it's filled with this tradition. The tradition of travel to Ethiopia, the tradition the legend of Prester John, the tradition of the legend of the Queen of Sheba. All this comes into the research somehow. But again, if it's there, why not use it in a creative way? So that's what I thought. Why not do a sort of travel diary? Because there's since the early times, there's been travel diaries in Ethiopia. They have a special flavor, and they have special topics. And so I knew all those topics, and so I thought I'll do another travel diary, which is also an ethnographic account, which is also an interpretation of oral legends, the way people think about this 15th, 16th, 17th century nowadays in Ethiopia, and their relations to the West and to the world. So it was a mishmash of things. And then I thought, why not drawing? So I added drawing. As I said, not because I had a grand scheme of things, but because the publisher said, why not drawing? They said, why not drawing? And the book sold well, as I also explained, because since it had so many drawings, it was not published in the anthropology, it was not sold in the anthropology section, but in the comics section. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. If I do drawing, I sell books. Why not continue? Not that I've sold many afterwards, but this is to say that any intellectual considerations on drawing and graphic anthropology came post est factum, not previous, but it was like a way forward, a way to think about what I had been doing anyway, which is I've always been doing comics and drawing and each time and more, and I think, now that I think of it, when I started having children, it's a bit like Virginia Woolf says, you have to have a room of one's own. It's not only for women, it's also for men. If you don't have a room for yourself, because it's filled with Legos and noises and kids, you don't have space to draw. So I think I started drawing preferably when traveling, because I would be alone, and you have to have time and to be with yourself to draw. And so I think I started drawing more while traveling, also because, because doing comic strips hurts your back all the time. And then I wouldn't have peace of mind drawing in my house, and then kids would come in. So this is not very intellectual, but I think
it's contextual.
It's very contextual. So I lean towards travel drawing, also because of not that actually my first research was on fishermen in Portugal, and I actually put lots of drawings in my thesis and then in the book. So I always combine one. It's good, sometimes you're reading too many letters. It's good to have some space to breathe, to let the text breathe.
Yeah. It's truly very good to also for the readers and to popularize the ideas. But we can come to this later, maybe, and you have some more methodological kind of.
And you can say no. You can say you're totally wrong. I don't mind.
Well, could you speak a little bit more about this, both drawing as a subjective and intimate practice, and drawing as expression of anthropological knowledge?
Yeah, that's something that everyone, I think, who draws or writes, it's always a problem. And I actually, I could have had an arts career. But the same thing applies. One thing is you paint and you draw, and it's something that it's your brain working with your hands and in relation to the hands, and organizing your mind beyond letters. I think it is important either because you play music or you draw or you paint. You know, it's important for your daily routine. It's European nirvana. Or European yoga. That's one thing. The other thing is there's a market, and either there's a market for art, there's a market also for anthropology. So there's you have to cross that border, and I was very irresponsible in the way I crossed the border, because I just said to my publisher, well, I have these travel diaries, you choose what you want and publish, because I can't really choose. But I would still tend to separate the two, that is a public expression, the uses of graphics to transmit knowledge, and the uses of sketching, as Tim Ingold would say, as part of the knowledge from within, that is part of being there and organize your knowledge in the field, or knowledge from the field. That's the way you put it. And I think that part, the knowledge from the field, it's the one I would value more, because that's when your brain is working. And as I said, I'm not very keen, also because of the context, which is northern Ethiopia, where the act of drawing is quite alien to most people, and the acknowledgement that I draw is minimal. So I don't do much so-called participatory graphic anthropology. Even though it can be a very interesting tool, but I don't actually go for it. I just like to organize my brain in different ways. That is, if I'm doing interviews and then I'm in a village or in an urban setting, and you know, somehow in the end of the day or during the day, I have to collect or combine all this in manners that they're not very clear for anyone, but in a way they're very clear to me, that I'm organizing what I got from that day. And if you see an image that, I don't know, for instance, in Goa, to you that could be, well, it's such as colors and traits, and you make it nice. But to me, I know exactly, you know, I'm more interested in what I know that's not represented, because things are not actually represented, figured or interpreted there. It's the things that this reminds me, and that's not transmissible. That's actually not transmissible. The smells, the people I was with, what happened in that day, that never comes through the drawing. But what is interesting is that people look at the drawing or read a book, but when they look at the drawing, especially a travel drawing, it's like a game. People are sort of drawn to exotism, even though they don't get anything that's there. They have the illusion that somehow they got something from the brain of the other person that was there. But in fact, as I say, what this represents for me is not transmissible. So this is like a carcass, where one that draws communicates with the one that sees, but the one that sees the drawing is not, you know, we're just getting this illusion. But because drawing and painting is an illusion, it's I really like one. I have to tell this story. It has lots of versions, this story, but the earliest one I know is a German, like a German small short story think 11th century, 12th century, written by Amis, and it's the story of Father Amis. I forgot the name of the author, but it's like lots of short stories. And the priest, there's a story of a German priest that goes to Paris, and in Paris he goes to the king and says, "I can paint your palace with beautiful images if you pay." And because I'm a very good painter, and the king says, "Yes, I really, I have a brand new palace, and I need the walls painted. Yes, and I'll paint I'll paint Noah and the opening of the Red Sea, and I'll paint all the stories of the Bible in your palace, and they'll be beautiful, most beautiful." And the king says, "Yes," and he says, "Yeah, but beware, my paintings are sacred. Only people who were born of a legitimate marriage can see them." No problem. And so he lives off the king for months. He wouldn't let anyone inside the palace. He ate and he drank and he lived as a king in the king's palace. And in the end, he invites the king and says, I'm finished. And the king wants to see the painting, and he says, "Look, this is the crossing of the Red Sea. You see the Pharaoh, yes, and you see Moses, and so he explains the Bible to the king. So he depicts all the stories of the Bible, and the king can't see anything because the walls are white, but he cannot say that he can't see, because if he'd said so, he'd be a bastard, so he couldn't be king. So he says, "Oh, they're beautiful." And so the king comes out of the palace and says, the paintings are beautiful. So all the court goes and see the walls. No one sees anything, but everyone appreciates, because no one wants to say he's a bastard. So this is a very early version, and as you know, the Emperor's New Clothes is a version of this. There's lots of little small versions in Italy and everywhere, and I think it goes really to the center of what art is, and in a way what drawing is. It's a game, and it's an illusion. You think you're seeing, but actually you're not seeing anything. You're just thinking that you're communicating with the beyond, and the beyond is mysterious India. But it's just a bunch of rapid traits that don't mean anything. But I think it is, like everything, like fiction is the truth. But it is a game. So I know that that is a dangerous game. But that's the game that I think it's important to try. Yeah. The problem is, once you publish the first drawing, then your work in the field is already tainted by the possibility that another drawing could be published. So there's an element of self-censorship that I think is quite dangerous. But the only way to avoid this would be to not show anything. But again, showing is also, as you know, it's a selections that there are drawings that I agreed to sort of publish because they reach the minimum level of public reconnaissance. That is, they're beautifulized. They have small bits of dark and light and color, so you make it nice. But that's not at all what drawing is about. Drawing is not making nice. Drawing is organizing your thoughts. You only make it nice in order to, as I said, to get some reward from the others, because your self-esteem is too low, maybe, I don't know. But
you mentioned somewhere that drawing could be perceived as a soft method. Could you maybe explain what you mean by that?
yeah, in a way, soft method in the sense that you don't have to think too much about it. That is, you don't need to glorify it as a tool. That is, it doesn't come in notes and queries or in the manual of ethnography by Marcel Griot and Marcel Mauss. It's not a formal method. It's just, it's using what you do anyway, which is writing or drawing without thinking of constraints or thinking of great objective. If the drawing is nice or if the drawing makes sense, then your brain gets impressed. If the drawing doesn't really make sense, your brain doesn't get impressed, your memories don't get impressed. So it's soft in this sense. It's part of your mental routine, namely in the field. That it doesn't reach the level of a formal tool. And I think it's quite right that it doesn't reach that level, because there's an element of pleasure and creativity and playfulness in the drawing that would be diminished by making it too serious. And drawing, you can do all sorts. There's no you should draw like this or you should draw like that. Makes sense if you want to have it published, but should be such a secondary criteria in your ethnographic procedure that, Fernando Galhano, he would draw in a very formalized way, with all the little tools and the tones, and he was reproducing as much the object as he was reproducing the 1,000 objects that had been drawn before. So he was conforming to that style, and that way of communicating, and so much the better that he did that. But I think that's not what I think is rich in sketching. It is partly doodling, partly not thinking, partly using your time, and as again Tim Ingold said, it's a training of your attention. You're allowing yourself to be open to the world and look at things and look at people. And I draw lots of people. So I'm not very good at straight lines, so I don't care about monuments or constructions, or I don't care about that. So I prefer to draw people's faces, even though people sometimes don't recognize themselves in the faces. I couldn't care less, because I'm more interested not so much in the particular person's features, but more on I'm not saying it's not in categorization, but on creating some harmony of the face. So if I go to Ireland, there's definitely an Irish face. Even though there's lots of people who don't conform to the Irish face, but there's always some Irishness in the Irish face, and I like to sort of try to figure that out. That the way people look, the gaze and the features. It's something that it's fascinating. People are fascinating, and people's faces are fascinating. So I'm very happy to be here, because because it's full of faces. I'm sort of serious, because it all leads to memories, and when I see faces, for instance, faces, I have to sort of rewind my brain, try to see where these faces fit in my memories, which are mainly imagetic or cinematic or literary. So in a way, I'm trying to conform, again, it's localizing strategy. I'm trying to conform the actual faces to images of Balkan faces, which is not easy, but because there's no Balkan face. But there's a bit of Germanousness, and you know, I'm trying to figure out, because people look different from my normal setting, which is Portuguese have this, we all have mustache, and I'm joking. But I recognize a Portuguese look everywhere. You know, I don't have to hear people speak. I just have to see the eyes, and I know, yeah, I'm 20% sure, not 90, but 20% sure he's Portuguese. There's a Portuguese eyes, a Portuguese nose, there's a Spanish are a bit different from the Portuguese. I like to play these games in my mind. In a way, we're always doing this, trying to recognize, you know, match your memories to the new. And so for me, it's, the drawing sort of is also a tool to observe faces and to observe postures and the way people sit and look and communicate. So I think that's part of yeah, the work one does, and to try to, you know, for instance, as you know, in the UK, it's very unwise and very rude sometimes to look to look at people in the eye. So English people don't look, you know, they look sideways because it's rude to look in the eye. In Ethiopia, if you don't look people in the eye, you're being rude. And people speak a lot, so much with their eyes. You know, there's all these movements, eyebrows and semi-closing the eyes, and there's a specific grammar for communication through the eyes in Ethiopia. And in a way, by bringing yourself to the topic of drawing eyes and people's faces, you're getting more and more aware of that grammar, because it's very important to be able to communicate in such way that you're not aggressing people. So if you have a posture that understands these basic things, then communication flows much better. If you're not looking in the eyes, if you're British and go to Ethiopia, you might be considered British in the sense that people don't trust you. And if people don't trust you, why should they speak to you? So it is like trying to, yeah, it's an interesting tool to be able to communicate, I think.
In what way is drawing during field work, since it can open some possibilities to connect with interlocutors, maybe different to drawing after doing field work? Or
Actually, I think I'll try to answer this way. I think there's a very important element of geometry and graphic thinking in anthropological production that is, or it's there, but it's not sufficiently highlighted. I mean, all anthropologists, well, there was a time when anthropologists loved to do kinship systems, and that's a graphic production. But people don't think too much, you know, they would accept the kingship system. Very few people at the time when study of kingship system was the thing. There was Edmund Leach saying, not a good idea to trust kinship graphics, but because most of anthropologists would use the lines and the squares and the triangles in a very laissez-faire way, without actually thinking very much about what they're doing. Because but they were doing it. They were doing graphic anthropology. That's graphic anthropology. If if you create a map, or if you do like Levi-Strauss use these opposition things, you're putting one word here and another word there with a slash in the middle, and then creating these diagrams of correlations and combinations. That's all graphic, that's all a graphic play. And when you use words such as center of town or high or low, you know, as defining a social setting, you're using geometry, you know, because there's no center of society, there's no margins of society. Where is the margin? You know, how can you talk about marginality? Doesn't exist. Only as a linguistic tool. There's no, where's the margin? Doesn't exist. It's just a game. It's a linguistic game at creating an imagery, a geometric imagery, and social sciences do this game, this analogy game all the time. So there's that element. So graphic after work, after field work is one thing. During field work is, as I say, it's more of a soft method to put your brain at work and try to empathize with the setting. Sometimes the setting is not very nice or very appealing or very amenable, and so in a way you have to create the conditions of accepting all these, you know, the flies and the smells and this and that and that. And I think drawing helps you to incorporate the outside in you, and as I say, to organize your memories. But that's one very private part of the work. The other part is, like I say, it's part of the production of knowledge, which is always very ideologically shaped. So soft in the sense it's freer during field work.
But in regards to skill, the skill of drawing, could in a way then handwriting and hand drawing be connected? I mean, because I think a lot of people have this fear of drawing because of...
Yeah, it's true, but I think people have the fear of drawing not because of the fear of drawing, but because of the fear that one's drawings can be viewed.
Yeah.
But you forget about it, there's no fear of drawing. Unless you're being too critical upon yourself. Because the idea that, oh, I don't get the dimensions right, or because, oh, maybe sometimes the hand is too big, or it's only important if you're communicating your drawings to anyone. Of course, I think as a tool for communicating, it's better to be a bit performative in the sense that you have skills. But to use sketching in field work is, I think, totally irrelevant. I mean, the fact that you can't, as I say, it doesn't make sense to say I can't draw. Doesn't make any sense. I cannot, well, you can say I cannot play the violin, that's true. But in the violin, it's a very hard instrument. It's really hard. Whereas everyone uses the pen. Yeah, everyone knows how to use the pen to draw A, B's, and C's, or to draw lines. And so I don't think people cannot say that they can't draw. If it is to work out your memories and like I said, you have this very inner work of making sense of the outside. I don't think it really matters either to separate drawing from writing, because I think there's a continuum between drawing and writing, which I think it's quite valuable. But, and again, usually anthropologists don't share their fieldwork notes. So why should they share the fieldwork drawings? So I think there's no case for being timid about drawing while in the field. You can be timid towards showing your drawings from the field, but that's as I say, for an anthropology, anthropology shouldn't be the main issue. It should be quite lateral, because that's not what drawing is about when you're in the field.
But what about people that you are in the field with and they watch your drawings? Because the writing, people usually don't. No, okay, for Slovenian language, if you write or type, nobody can read if you are not in Slovenia. but anyway, the drawing, someone sees that you drew, and it depends. Of course, we were speaking before with the students. It depends on what, in which cultural environment, what kind of status has the drawing. So in Ethiopia, maybe people don't look so much in the drawing, while in other contexts, maybe they do look. And then it becomes automatically something participatory if people look. So this kind of maybe relates.
Yes, that is true. I mean, it's a very famous part of Tris Tropique. I don't know if you remember. At the point, Levi-Strauss has a talk with the chief of the Nambikwara tribe, and he is always taking notes. And the chief says, I'm not going to talk to you if you don't give me a piece of paper and a pen, because it's not, we're not in an equal field. So he decided he wouldn't answer Levi-Strauss's questions. He would write his answers. So to Levi-Strauss, and would show his answers to Levi-Strauss. And there's a drawing of, which is like this. So there's a piece of paper, and it's like this. Well, I'm trying to reproduce the Nambikwara style. And so that's what Levi-Strauss said. So what about your relations between the wife of the brother? It's here. And but when Levi-Strauss then says, but then the chief would make a commentary upon his own writing, and then I would understand what he had been writing. But then, and that's the last part. He says, then the chief understood what is the power of writing, which is, when he left the village, he wanted to give number of gifts to the people, and the chief says, wait, I have a list here of the things that you have to give to everyone. So he says, the chief understood the power of writing. The power of writing is the power of saying who's to receive the gifts, because he was the chief. He was the one who was writing. And I think it's a very interesting little story. It is a very good example of participatory graphic anthropology. The anthropologist writing, and the other one answers with his own invented graphics, and has a relationship with the anthropologist. As I said, in Ethiopia, I don't have actually that kind of rapport, because people don't really care about drawing. In Portugal either. Most people in Portugal are too timid to ask anything. So I get by. No one cares about drawing in Portugal. No one cares about drawing in Ethiopia. If I go to Spain or Italy or to the Maghreb or to Lebanon, that's different. People really want to see what I've been doing, and they would want to draw, and that's really good. I once managed to stay in someone's house for a whole week in Tunisia, thanks to drawing. So and I was really down in the desert in one of these new oasis, and it was a really great time because the man that I was in a collective taxi with him and said, "Oh, what are you drawing?" "Yeah, actually I also draw. You have to come to my house," and so I stayed there. So it can be a very tool to impinge myself upon people. Or in Jerusalem, I was drawing a lot. Israeli people were looking like this, thinking, "What is he doing?" But then Palestinians were really happy. Said, "Wow, you're drawing! Show me!" And then again, tea parties in East Jerusalem, and I drew the family, and so it can be a socializing tool because it's not very impositive enough. If you have a camera, you're actually putting something between you and the person. With the drawing, you're looking at people and looking down. It's not very aggressive. You have to be gifted to use a camera, much more than using a paper and pencil. I think you have to be really gifted. I have a French photographer friend who's done work in Ethiopia for more than 20 years, and it is a gift. It is a communicating gift to be able to not be aggressive and to empathize with the person. You have to have really good communication skills to laugh while you're taking a photo and have a great photo and have a great expression of the person. You have to really be very, very gifted. And I don't have that gift, so I draw. But it's in a way it's good for timid people and.
Maybe I have a question that connects some dots of the mentioned topics. How do you view humor as a tool with the connection of drawing, and how do you deal with censorship and perhaps your standpoint giving or including your critical standpoint with the use of humor?
Yeah, that's a good question actually. Because I actually did lots of comics as a second life, and partly those comics I used to work with a friend who's a writer. We had this sort of satirical comic strips and satirical takes on. It's very political. It was a time when there was this hegemony of the Social Democrats in Portugal. When Portugal arrived, it was the first years of the European Union, and so there was sort of very, very hegemonic, flat view of everything, and the left was nowhere to be seen. And so suddenly there was this weird newspaper or weekly paper called The Independent that was produced a bit inspired by the British, the English version, The Independent, and where they paid very well, and we were allowed to do whatever we wanted. So we had a whole page for ourselves in the end of the paper. We could do whatever, and so it was a great school for a kind of humor that was not common in Portugal, because we're very strict with humor. The British have their own sense of humor and their specificities, and the French a different one, the Germans a different one, etc., etc. And the Portuguese, you could say that we're totally surrealistic, and because in order to live in Portugal, you have to have a good humor, but people don't understand that they're part of the joke. It's very absurd, but people are so much in character that they don't see the fun of it, which is, I think, very interesting. And humor in Portugal, I think it's connected to these Inquisition times. The idea that you cannot get above or beside or beyond the rest. There has to be uniformity. Because in yeah, sorry, okay.
No, it's okay.
I really wanted to say this.
No, you can still. Then it's time for another question, and so it's okay.
No, I think it is interesting because Monty Python, they have this sketch, the Spanish Inquisition. I don't know if you know, the Spanish Inquisition. But there is the Portuguese Inquisition. People don't talk about it, but it's been there since the early 16th century to the late 18th century. There was the Portuguese Inquisition, but there were no Jews, because the Jews had been converted to Christianity. So it was what the Inquisition was there for what? There were no Muslims, there were no Jews.
Witches? Witches?
No witches. Well, they were there, they were not, no, people wouldn't care. The Portuguese Inquisition was, as a Portuguese historian called it, a Jewish factory. That is, we went from no Jews to lots of Jews. Because you'd use the accusation, an anonymous accusation of Jewish practice upon your neighbor, or someone who was not conforming. You say, yeah, he's a Jew. I know that he practiced or she practiced some Jewish rituals. The people would go to prison, but they could only be freed from being burned in the stake if they confessed being a Jew. And if they would denounce at least 5 people. So, in the start, no Jews. In the end, lots of Jews, because everyone, in order to live, they say, yes, I was a Jew, I did this and I did this, but I admit it was wrong, but there was these other people that were also Jews. So that Portuguese Inquisition is very peculiar. And it really, I think it created our national character of being, not getting out of this overall conformity. So Portuguese humor is not satire, it's not absurdity, it's rarely word games. It is a way to pull people into conformity. Get a trait of differentiation and poke fun of that trait of differentiation in order to make people not look different. So it's a very special kind of sensory humor. And it's one that I think it's not very nice. So because actually, I think it was even before the revolution that we had Monty Python in Portugal, in the TV, before the revolution. So when I was a kid watching Monty Python, so in a way I had Tintin and Monty Python, and so Belgian French drawing and British humor. And so this in a way was a starter, an interesting starter to do to use humor in a way that was not, poking fun at people, just helping, but because I think that's what drawing does, helps you look at things sideways, or in a way that's not the norm. So I think it's I would connect the two. To use humor in life and in words, and using graphics to change the perspective. Did I answer well? So.
Yeah. I'm trying to find some example for the humor, for example, in your drawing, like in the drawing of tourists in Lisbon, or the drawings in the museum that you were probably referring to as well, yeah, because it would be very nice to, do you know where I can find Gebrani?
Sure. Yeah,
because it would be very interesting to see, you know, this kind of criticism of relations, as you found out, between the objects and the people through humor is very interesting.
Actually, it seems that book.
This one.
Yeah. This was to be a book. I was to participate in a book. It was a very critical book on the Quai Branly, but then the book didn't come out, and so I published it in a journal. So. Oh, no, it's scrolling. It's on the scroll.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe. Yeah. So I did an ethnographic trip to the museum. So for 5 days I was there drawing and watching people interacting with the objects, and because it's a very interesting museum. That it's a state museum with a very weird ideological foundation. It's a museum for non-European arts. So des arts premières, the first arts, but not the European ones. So it's Oceanic and African and Asian and American, no Europe, because Europe has another museum which is called Le Louvre. And so I thought it would be fun to look at that incongruency of the museum, and of a museum that was made to glorify the exotic and incorporate Levi-Strauss in the museum, because actually there's a theater, and Levi-Strauss's theater, and all the discourse in the museum is very owes a lot to Levi-Strauss. So it's like a vengeance of Levi-Strauss after death. It's the Museum of Quai Branly. And again, it's a concept of saying you don't have to go to those places, because the objects, not only the objects, but the spirit and the explanation of the objects are here. So you don't have to travel to Africa. You can get to the museum, because the not only the object, but the possibility of explaining the objects and the society are here at hand. And so it was a very interesting way of counteracting the ideas that were put forward for the Convention of Intangible Heritage. That the idea was, yes, we have to value the heritage of the African peoples because they're in danger, and so we can nominate all these cultures, and you can have tourism, basically. You can go to Dogon country or Hamar country, and or the Konso in Ethiopia. They are classified. The statues and the making of the statues is classified by UNESCO. But you have to go to Konso instead. Why not just go to the museum in Paris? And I think that was an important key for the construction of the notion of this museum. It's to, again, before it was to steal people's objects, and as you know, the Musée de l'Homme and the collection, the Griot collection in the expedition was at the time very controversial, and they were accused, namely by Breton and others, of stealing African treasures. And now, after those treasures were stolen from the museum of the Musée de l'Homme, that is, Chirac nominated someone to to plunder all the French museums to create this new museum. So he went about all the French museums and said, I want this, and I want this, and I want this. So these collections, the best of ethnographic collections in France is in this museum by presidential order, which is a plunder of a plunder. But it plunders also not only the objects, but the explanation, the anthropological explanation of the objects. So you don't have to travel, you go to the museum. I think it's a great idea, it's a very perverse French idea. But in a way it was thought over, it was not unplanned, it was really planned, which I find interesting and perverse but interesting. And then, of course, it was planned. Again, if I read the story right, it was planned but adapted, because basically Chirac wanted to have the ultimate meta-museum. And someone reminded him, yes, but the English have done this. It's called Tate Modern. Oh, damn. So I can't do a Tate Louvre Modern, because where can I get a museum that's as big as Tate Modern? I can't do it. Okay, I'll do a Tate Primitive. And that's what it is. It's to play with these opposite notions, the modern and the primitive. I'll do primitive. Yeah, don't call it primitive. Okay, we'll call it première. But yeah. So I had to make fun of it. So that's what I did. It's a pity that the book didn't come out, because it was filled with very interesting chapters by different specialists on the kind of displays that were there. But yeah, the book never came out.
Maybe we started with the drawings of Fernando.
Gagano.
Yes. And now we see the sketchbook, and we see that human figures are in the center of our attention.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe what added value does drawing people bring in the opposition?
To Fernando Gagano?
Yeah.
Probably none, because as I said, I think even though they're very attractive, the Fernando Gagano's drawings are they're very attractive, they're very realistic. But it's like, I think by then, it was the 1950s, 1960s, you have photography since the mid-19th century. Why do drawings that look like photographs in the mid-20th century? Because there is a tradition. He was referring to a very interesting tradition in the 19th century and the early 20th century of doing ethnography with drawings. And if you browse any monography, early monography, you'd have the whole section. Boas would do. There's lots of drawings, not by Boas, but in Boas's books, on full of very interesting drawings. So I think he was doing that because it's what you're supposed to do. So there's not much creativity in his drawing. He was tasked, because he has very different drawings, the ones that they're not actually shown. He was a very interesting painter and draftsman, but that's the part that he never published. What he published was as part of a team that was tasked to be a very anthropological team, very straight. And so that's why you get these very formal drawings. Nowadays, there's no. I don't feel bound by that tradition. This is like, it's much more inspired, as I say, on the Tintin, mixed Tintin and Hugo Pratt, because that's what I used to read when I was a kid. this kind of drawing.
We have plenty of questions, but in order to not to be too long, I would like to open the questions for the public as well, because yeah.
I hope I'm making some sense, because I'm freewheeling. I know there's a camera there. I'm supposed not to say some stuff, but it can be cut if I'm saying wrong things. Actually, that's one thing. That's in relation to drawing. I don't know why, but I think it was because of my father. My father once said, when I was really a kid, I think there was one or two things that he said, because he used to draw a lot before. Then he stopped drawing. But one thing he would quote was Picasso, saying, you can copy from everyone else, the thing you shouldn't do is plagiarize yourself. Yeah, fair enough, I'll take that. And the other one was, I think I was having trouble actually plagiarizing Tintin, a cover by Tintin, The Temple of the Sun, and I was using the eraser. My father said, "Why are you using the eraser? You shouldn't use you don't have to use the eraser. In a way, if you don't use the eraser, either you get things wrong, and you feel frustrated by the fact that you're doing things wrong because the trait is not exactly, or you use that mistake and incorporate the wrong and write the wrong without using the draft part." So in a way, I stopped using the idea, because usually you think, oh, you do a draft in paper, in pencil, and then you ink it. And there was a time I thought, you don't have to go through this. Why? You just ink exactly without having to draw, because it's really boring. You have to draft and then go again. Why? But then, that's when my father said, "Yeah, don't worry. If it's wrong, it's wrong. You don't have to be ashamed, or if the trait goes there, you just use it somehow." And so I sort of developed this technique of doing things wrong but getting them right, without caring too much about they should be exactly as what. There's no exactly as what, because you're neither reproducing or even representing. I think it's this idea that it's very specific in a way to European culture, the idea that drawings reproduce or represent, that is, they're figurative. It doesn't make sense. It only makes sense because history says it makes sense, because Greeks and Romans invented this thing called mimesis, that art should be equal to reality or improve upon reality. But it doesn't make, it's just a convention, and Ethiopians think otherwise. They don't see that match, as I explained. Marcel Griol talks about this. An icon is an icon. You don't bring reality into the icon, because the icon is what it is. You can only, of course the Ethiopians have all these discourses, the Greeks do. Yes, you have to cleanse yourself and do all these ablutions and practices and pray and etc., and then you're in a state of purity, and then you can paint the icon, because you have to be in a state of purity and chastity in order to paint, etc. I've seen the reality in Ethiopia. They couldn't care less, but they say they do all this. But the fact is that it's the icon. They're there not to create anything. They're there to reproduce the previous icon. And the next icon never reproduces the previous icon. They know very well that they are creating, but they just don't recognize that they are creating. Whereas European or Western artists think, I'm creating, but they never recognize that they are reproducing. That, you know, once, what's his name? The British Zimbabwean artist, very famous. He did a Madonna with the cow dung, and he won the Turner Prize. So if you do, I forgot his name. It's very well. Anyway, he did a Madonna, an African sort of Africanish Madonna, decorated with the elephant dung. And of course, it's really controversial and modern, cow dung or elephant dung in an exhibition. How very interesting! How very interesting! And he won the Turner Prize, but actually he was doing a Madonna. The thing is, it was not the cow dung was the deception bit. He was doing a Madonna has been done since the early Christian periods. Madonnas. So Europeans don't usually see the copy part. Ethiopians don't see the creative part, but there's always a mixture of both.
I think you need to have opportunity to pose any question if you want, or comment or something.
You gave us a lot to think. I think it's wonderful, and I don't disagree with you. I would like to disagree, but I don't. I would just like to pose you a question about humor. I think it's really interesting what we were saying before, and a bit about how, for example, self-humor, making fun of yourself. You're talking about Portuguese national character. We know that it's an illusion, but it's difficult to understand to put right, anthropologically right, all these similarities that are in Portugal. So can you just? I think I was just wondering about how do you see this because it intrigued me very much. The way you're talking about humor in Portugal, and what about making fun of yourself in Portugal? Is it something that it's present and you could sense this, or not so much?
Yes, I think yes and no. I mean, I know that because in part of my life, at the point, I was more sort of in the public eye, not because of anthropology, but more because of this road trauma and road safety issues, and doing this and being an anthropologist, I could see myself being an activist. So it was, I knew that there was a role I was playing, the role of the activist, fighting for safer roads and for pedestrian rights, and of course I'm always, making fun of myself in that respect, because I knew that it was a game, but you have to follow the rules of the game, and you can push the game here and there. There's only too much that you can go. And because sometimes if you go a bit further, people don't understand. The notion of private. Actually, this friend of mine, he said, "You're the king of private jokes. No one understands you. You're making fun of people. You're making fun of yourself, and people are not getting because it's a private joke." And so it's a bit autistic. But for instance, just to give you the example, he was involved with a group that they're called the Happy Faithful, They would do demonstrations, like street art actually in the 80s, street performance. They go to the center of town and they do demonstrations. They were just about 10, 15 people. And it was still the time when people would do demonstrations and, you know, demonstrating for workers' rights and women's liberation and whatever. And they would demonstrate. They would come forward. They would call demonstrations against the end of the month, or in favor of the government. And it was really funny. It was very absurd. But it was interesting. People didn't really understand, and the police didn't understand. And when they did this demonstration, I think it was against the end of the month, or in favor of the government. No, actually, it was the end of the month. The police said, "Where are your papers? Because you needed authorization to have a demonstration." But they were not demonstrating. They were doing street theater. But they were doing street theater where there was a demonstration, and so the police said, "Do you have authorization?" And said, "Authorization for what? For doing street theater?" No, for doing demonstration. No, but this is a street theater of a demonstration. They went to prison because they didn't have the papers. So they spent the weekend in prison because they didn't have the papers for a demonstration against the end of the month. I mean, great. But with this, so with our NGO, we managed to stop the traffic in the main street of Lisbon and paint the pavement with these white silhouettes of people, dead people, and the police was stopping the traffic because it was a good cause. We're not demonstrating against the end of the month. We were celebrating or paying homage to the death of pedestrians. But it was a joke. It was a serious joke, but it was, I knew that this was in a way, street theater, but for a good cause. So you have to understand where you can land on prison or not, or you can have recognition. And actually, my father, he was an actor, and in a way was very leaning towards the opposition. But he always said, only stupid people get caught. Because you have to be very stupid to be more stupid than the police. Because the political police, the secret police, they were not very clever. So you'd have to be dumb. And his brother was in prison and tortured for 3 months, so he knew what he was talking about. My father played plays and he did lots of things that normally he shouldn't have done. And he got lots of praise because people didn't understand that, there's a gray area. Sometimes if you play the gray area, you can do lots of things. If you go into straight opposition, sometimes you don't get things done, either before the revolution or after the revolution. We did the demonstration. I'll finish. Because I really like this one. It's not self-referring, but it was funny. It was funny. There was the cartoon controversy, the Prophet Muhammad cartoon, the Danish. And there was lots of demonstrations, especially in the Arab world, against the Danish. And Danish products were being cancelled. Cancelled, that's a new word. And demonstrations against Danish because of the cartoon, etc., etc. So we called the demonstration in support of the Danish. And it was still the time of the blog, so it spread through blogs, and you had all these different people coming to the Danish embassy in support to demonstrate support for the Danish. And it was the very leftist, very, very leftist people and the ultra-right people. Everyone had a reason to come in support for the Danish. And we had the petition, and everyone signed the petition. And we went with the petition to the ambassador. They gave the petition. The ambassador cried because said it was the only demonstration in these times of trouble. It was the only demonstration in favor of the Danish that we had, because everyone is against us, and you're supporting us. And no one read the petition. And the petition said, we were very happy for this controversy because that gave us the opportunity, as Portuguese, to demonstrate in favor of a people who are more Protestant, more blonde, more blue-eyed, and richer and taller than we. And that's what. And people signed this petition because they didn't read it. I thought, that's funny. And it was, there were television cameras, and there's a demonstration in favor of the Danes. And the Portuguese are demonstrating in favor of people who are taller. It's fun. So I think I like these kind of fun things. But again, I think you have to sort of know the game. And so in a way, that's why I didn't migrate, because I sort of didn't. I know the game in Portugal. If I'd go to another country, probably I wouldn't know the legal game, the bureaucratic game, the social game, as well as I know the Portuguese game. I actually lived in France, and in France I was faced with a concrete wall which was called bureaucracy, because the French invented bureaucracy. And you cannot go past French bureaucracy. It is a wall. I know the Portuguese bureaucracy. It is a wall, but you go sideways because it's not a big wall. So yeah, I'm in favor of staying at home. But it's dangerous. Actually, that's what I mentioned in this book. Sorry. On this book, a chapter in the book by Sarah Pink, or edited by Sarah Pink, Working Images, is you have to be careful with, because I had been invited to do the sealing of the new display of the Ethiopian Studies Museum in Addis Ababa. I thought, that's a good idea, because the French curator said, why don't you draw? Why don't you paint the story of the Queen of Sheba on the walls of the museum? I said, that's a great idea. Mm-hmm. And I do all the preparatory, these drawings, and then a friend of mine, Muslim from Harar, said, are you sure you want to go ahead with this? And I understood, no, I'm not going to do the drawings of the Queen of Sheba. So a Ferengi, a foreigner, doing the drawings of the Queen of Sheba? No way. So only a foreigner would have thought that. So you have to be careful. There was a traumatic story in Addis Ababa, because at the time of the independence of Eritrea, with the German couple, they were almost slaughtered because they couldn't understand the game, the imagery game. And that was really very dangerous. Sometimes it can be dangerous. So you have to know the system. There's always a system, the idea that before you had censorship, now you don't. There was repression, now there isn't. Yeah, it's not like this. There's always repression and censorship. It comes from different places. I'm not sure I want to say this. But yes, I think that. So in a way, drawing can be a useful tool also to overcome censorship, because you can say things through drawings that you cannot say through words.
This was really good point for to remember. Yeah, that you can say things through drawing that you cannot say through words. I mean, it seems plain, but it's so true. And I would love to talk more, but I think we could talk informally further on. It's really great to.
Thank you for the opportunity to free will.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it was very inspiring. So we can continue talking after. I just want to give you a little present from the department.
Thank you very much.
And yeah, thank you for coming. So yeah, yeah.